Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Hi, and welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. My name is Tony Bodoh.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer. We're so happy you're here today.
Absolutely. Today we have Ivy Slater as our guest, and we have her here because she is going to talk to us about developing clients for life. And I think that's such an important thing for us to look at today and understand that we wanted to bring her on the show and really dive deeper into this topic.
Yeah, Tony, I'm so excited to have Ivy on the show after we had a prep call and just already learned so much from her. She's a very successful businesswoman. She facilitates growth and expansion and works with leaders and just has this incredible work experience that she shares some of her learnings with us. So without further ado, Ivy, welcome. We are so happy to have you here today.
I always love to join you guys and just chat, and that we're live today even just makes it more fun.
Yeah, no kidding. It's always fun. Ivy, I kind of gave a high-level overview of your career, but I'd really like to dive in a little bit and give our audience a flavor for your career path. You've had an incredible career so far, very successful businesswoman. Could you just kind of give us the road trip that you've been on in your career?
So this successful businesswoman learned early in cutting her teeth. I was fired from my first job out of college. And so there was success number one because it got it out of the way really early and learned how to navigate it and not stop you. In that experience, being in my young 20s, I was devastated. And from that devastation came opportunity. People saw in me, people were referring me to jobs and my next. And I'll always say in every situation that you think we have troubles, we have an amazing ability to have opportunity and possibility, and it's for us to be grounded enough to see it. So that was number one experience. Through that, I got referred to a job. I worked for a woman who owned a series of health clubs in the New York metropolitan area. So that was New York, New Jersey, Long Island. The New York metropolitan area is a very broad, draw kind of a 100-mile radius, and that's you have it. And she owned a series of health clubs. I was her right hand for several years, and it would be like things, Ivy, I want to do a sales training, so start gathering the district managers, start setting up the calendar with all the management, and here's a stack of materials. This is way pre-computer or internet. Here's a stack of materials to try to figure all this out and put together a training. I'm like, okay, because that's all you said as a young woman is like, okay, I'm on that. So I worked for her for several years. I ended up planning a YPO event, Young Presidents Organization. Sure, many of the listeners are familiar with that organization. And she's like, well, I'm having this event, da-da-da-da-da. Handle it, organize it. Nobody sits with spouses. We want things. This was actually what you now today call networking. Back in the day, it was like nobody sat with a spouse. Everybody was strategically placed by industry, by this and that and the other thing. And one of the things I did was hire the corporate event company to do the event portion of it and the catering. In that debrief, we had a conversation that looked like, they wanted to know about more of her business. And I said, well, I want to understand more about what you do and a little bit more about your organization. Out of the mouth of a 25-year-old. Or so, maybe 24 at the time. And she said, you sound very interested. I said, well, I actually am, because I've been organizing my girlfriend's birthday party since we were 10 years old. And I'm the person who reads Gourmet Magazine cover to cover every month. I just love food and entertaining. She said, wow, I just gave notice. My parents bought an inn out in Pennsylvania, and I'm going to go run their food service and events for them. Would you like to interview for my job? And that, the key thing I learned in that moment was if you don't ask, you don't receive. In that as it is, continued to jump forward. I did that for a whole bunch of years. I was married. We knew we wanted in the next few years start a family. And I said, working 7 days and 7 nights, which is the event industry, was not conducive to my vision of being a working mom. I wanted to at least have a 5-day-a-week job, not a 7. That led me to, in a convoluted way, ended up in the printing industry. And I was told early on, I was like, I had to learn the industry. I had to learn what we were selling. And I did this, training program, so to speak, which wasn't much of a training program, but it was a training program. And 3 weeks in, most of my money was on commission, and it's time to make some money. And I said, okay, so where do I start? How do I get clients? I'm ready for this commission stuff. Let's go. And they're like, it's the yellow pages and the pavement. Pick one and go. The yellow pages is in the front closet. Open up to an industry and start calling. Or this is New York City. Put on a pair of shoes, walking shoes, and get out. And this was the time. So just when we talk about elevator pitches and things like that in introductions, this is truly when you used to ride the elevators and try to meet people, because there was no security at this time in New York. So you could walk into the Chrysler building and get on the elevator and smile and say, hi, where are you heading today? And that was the beginning of the elevator pitch. And I was like, wow, no uncertain term, that kind of sucks. And I don't want to do either, but I really needed money, okay? Young, newly married, living in New York City, you needed 2 strong incomes, and I was making buck guess at the time. And I called my old boss and I said, listen, I just want you to know that all the events, that I was involved in and the clients I handled, I'm going to call them up and, see who they can introduce me to. I don't want you to think I'm like coming into competition or anything. I'm in the printing industry. And she looked at me. She goes, Ivy, what do you think you were going to do? Like go to Times Square and like take your clothes off and attract clients? Like, of course, you're not standing next to the naked cowboy. That's what you do in sales. And I was like, got it, Jocelyn. And we are still connected today. And I called my old clients, and I used to handle one of the partners at Goldman Sachs. I handled all of his charity and his wife's charity work. I had just finished Columbia University's business school's graduation. So I called them up. It's like, hi, how are you? And I built, and when we talk about clients for life, that's how you get clients for life, because they are lifetime relationships. So that's my long, short story.
Oh, I love it. And I love how much context and energy you bring to those stories too. Because we have so much to dig into, and I'm just so excited to hear more of your story. So thank you for sharing that. I think the one thing that comes to mind for me is just to remember that for people that have reached a certain point in their career, it wasn't always like that. People have had to work really, really hard. And this has come up with me in several conversations just in the last week of people saying, oh yeah, it's a 20-year overnight success story. So yeah, it's always good to hear that, there were some times where you had to do the hard stuff for sure.
And I will say, I rode some elevators in New York for many, many years. And you learn to ask. And I was a shy, introverted kid. So this was not in my comfort zone.
Well, I find it interesting because the asking part there is something that we tend not to want to do. Many of us, at least, we tend not to want to do. So can you dive a little deeper into that? What did that look like for you early on? And maybe what does asking look like for you today? Because I'm sure with the changing of times, there's probably things that have stayed the same, but there's also things I'm guessing that are different too.
Huge things are different. One of the key things is we walk around with a computer 24/7 and a phone. And that is very different. We have been trained to expect immediate results versus truly working for those results. Because in a blink of an eye, hey, do I want to do this? I'll just Google that. And, be that as it may, when we look at mindset training and habits training and what that teaches us, we look to what's new, what is relevant today versus what we had back in the day. When you talk about the ask, I think one of the things that is most misconstrued about it is opposed to people think about, well, you're asking for things. You're always asking for something. And when I think about the ask, I think about the ask coming from a place of curiosity and a place of, how can I help you? And if I don't ask how things are with you, what is of interest, how I can help, what is working or not working in your world right now? If you could change anything, what would it look like? And when somebody lays that out, and if I have the ability to actually either help them myself or know somebody to help them, then it's actually, I find it rude and insensitive not to offer that and ask if they're open for help. I'm not looking for work. I'm not looking to sell anything. I'm looking to service and help people achieve something that they want to achieve. And I've come from that place of curiosity to ask what they're looking to achieve.
I love that so much, because curiosity is something that I've actually, I can't say been studying, but really been intrigued by. I have several people in my circle that talk about curiosity, and I'm really trying to wrap my head around what that actually means. And the other day someone said to me, oh, you have a very curious mind. And this was a prospect. And that made me feel really good, because I thought, oh, I must be asking the right questions. So I appreciate your confirming that approach. Ivy, one of the things that you shared with us earlier was about somebody that has been a client on several stops in your career. So can you share that story with our listeners, please?
Oh, absolutely. So I say we go back 18 years, but that's probably been saying that for a while. So I'm just going to say 18 plus plus. And I track this thinking about my kids. So I was a mom, I was a printer. I, at that point, had a small piece of the company, more of a junior partner, if you want to call it that. And she was the head of the marketing and advertising department for a company called Chantel Lingerie, okay, which is an intimate apparel company, global company, parent company out of France. And she was one of the accounts that I landed. Because one thing, when I did get started in printing, I was never handed an account or a referral. Everything I built. So through building relationships, through an opportunity at one place to another, I met a designer who was doing work for one company, and he was also working for Chantel. He goes, they're going to be doing some printing. Let me introduce you. And so we were always relationship. We started doing business. For years, I did their two big print jobs, which was their catalogs for all the stores for their spring and fall lines, with all the lot changes and the code changes. And we would direct ship it to, Nordstrom's, Neiman's, Bloomingdale's, Saks, Dillard's, and Macy's. Okay. And so it was two nice sized jobs. And then we started getting the smaller collateral for their sales meetings and things like that were done in the States. Lovely. A very good piece of business. Printing is manufacturing. And when you're dealing with any manufacturer, Tony, I love that smile. It's like, I don't even have to tell you. You're like, yeah, I see where this one's going. Whenever you're dealing with manufacturing, you're dealing with a potential something that can go wrong. And 1 year, one job, we hit that something that went wrong. It was produced in the summer. There was a lot of humidity in New York City. The paper came in. The paper was no good. The paper was returned. We got the next lot of paper. The air in the paper and the humidity, and it could stretch on the sides, and it was called black with knockout white type. And then when you stretch it, all of a sudden things are out of register. It was one problem after another. And no matter how we got to the next steps of that printing process, if it was bindery because the paper was no good, the score cracked. When you folded it, just everything we touched went bad, all based on the paper issue. And ripple effect goes forward. We eventually come down to let's get this job delivered. Let's get it sold. Let's get it shipped. It has a deadline. For some reason, the spring catalog isn't waiting for us. right? It's a very timely situation, or the full catalog actually, because it was a summer print. And then it comes down to sitting down in that meeting and saying, and you know you haven't delivered the quality that you stand behind. And you have to have that very uncomfortable conversation. And that uncomfortable conversation has to do with slashing your prices, owning your responsibility. Although I didn't make the paper, my name is on the door. And owning that responsibility and taking it. And she said, Ivy, I like you very much. And I'm very sorry to say you're off our vendor list. And so that's called being fired by a client. So that was firing number 2. I'm sure there were many others in there. You just choose to only count so many. Technically I was fired. And I said, I understand. I'm very sorry. I know we've been full service. We've really stood up as a vendor for you for many, many years. And this really hurts, and the one thing I don't want it to hurt is the relationship we have built over the years. Because at that moment I said, I might not do business with Chantel again, but I can do business with this woman. And if I handled this politically correctly as a lady, or a gentleman, so to speak, I could still have this relationship. So jump forward a year or two, every so often, send a note, the good old-fashioned handwritten notes. Hope you're well. Happy holidays. Wishing you a great summer travel, because she always traveled in the summer, right? So you build a relationship. You know what somebody likes. You know their hobbies. You don't just know them on a business level. And this is one of the key things. A couple of years later, she changes jobs. Funny how people do that. And in that was opportunity. And I chatted with her again. And this now is jumping forward to 2008, the year I opened Slater Success. And I ran both Slater Success and Slater Graphics for 2 years together simultaneously. So I said, hey, I hear you're back in New York, this, that, and the other thing. Yes. I said, want to meet for coffee? She's like, I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you. We did. And I shared with her that, of course I'm still doing Slater Graphics and I'm opening this new company. And if you think about it, all the women I have worked with over the years, really to have, a woman leader, and having somebody in your corner as a leadership consultant, how to grow and scale and what's possible, and really owning your value, understanding your worth, and looking in the mirror and seeing that every day. And she looked at me, and she was a very strong, powerful woman. And she goes, I love this. This is what you're going to do. And I was like, okay. And she's like, I'm going to introduce you to Joy Gordon. She's the CEO of Dress with Success. I'm very involved in Dress with Success. I said, I know, because I printed those invitations that were honoring you 3 times until you were happy. And
that's
and
awesome.
The program that went with it as a donation. I know how involved you are. She goes, so this is what we're going to do. You're going to sit down. You're going to meet with Joy. You're going to see how you can get involved. I actually am part of lead the Young Executive Committee. And these are all the young leaders that donate their time in young executive situations. And you're going to get involved and you're going to speak for them. What do you speak on? I take a breath. I was like, I have several topics. Let me just get back to you on the ones that would be most impactful. So tell me a little bit about the people in that group. Again, I have my notebook. I am diligently taking notes. Okay. And again, I'm asking questions. And I said, wow, it sounds what you're saying is these are really the emerging leaders of tomorrow. And they're people, young women who are really doing well and on the executive track. Do they talk much about goals? And she goes, oh, probably not enough. I said, what if we did something around goal setting and we can help them establish their goals? And then I could come back in about 6 months and we could check on them. She goes, oh, I love that. And that was the beginning. So now that goes to the next level and the story's not over. Okay. She goes on, that next job didn't work out. She goes on, changes jobs again. And now she is hired by a company that You guys might know, might not, but it's a skincare line called Bodoh. They were opening their first New York City spa in the Plaza Hotel, and she was hired to bring their brand to New York City. Hi, Ivy. Hi, how are you? The next conversation. And we have lunch, and she tells me, I'm doing this. And one day, and what the work I'm doing, I could see myself opening my own marketing agency. And I said, that would be great. Maybe you can help me with that. I said, I probably can. Let's look at what that could look like. And I asked her what. I said, do you remember back in the day, what were those goals? What are those goals for you? What is your vision for your life? What is the vision for this company that aligns with those? And I asked all those questions. And then she goes, I think I want to do this. What does it look like to work with you? Now, back in the day, I charged almost nothing because I was teaching how to step into your value. And I was that woman business owner who wasn't. And I gave her this small price that she goes, oh my God, I would never pay that. I was like, of course not. She goes, yet I have several friends who might also be interested in working with you. Would you work with us as a group? And I said, of course I would. Made another note in my notebook. And I said, let me come back to you with how that could look. They paid me to write my first group coaching program over 9 months. Jump forward again. Okay, now she's like, oh, and Dress for Success is having this event. You're going to come for breakfast, aren't you? $100 check later. I said, of course I'm going to come for the eggs I don't eat, the coffee I don't drink, and a cold cup of tea because, in those 500-person breakfasts, by the time they come around with tea service, the water is ice cold and pitch black. Yeah. And I show up, I mentioned earlier, guys, I am an introvert at heart, and I show up at the Rosewood Hotel with 500 women. My stomach gets left on the elevator because I do not know how in the world I'm going to survive this, let alone navigate it. And I check my coat and I smile, and I'm like just walking around smiling, saying, I have nobody to talk to. I know this one woman, and I know the CEO of Dress for Success, and she doesn't want to talk to me with 500 people here today. And, so I'm just walking around smiling and looking and smiling. And I finally find her, and she takes me by the hand. She goes, I'm so glad you came. Come with me. I'm going to introduce you to your next client right now. And she walked me across the room, and she goes, this is this woman. She's running this team, this, that, and the other thing. And they're wiping the floor with her, and she needs to take control. And you're just the woman to help her. Have a conversation. She'll hire you. Then I sat next to another woman who said, oh yeah, I have this side business. I'll hire you one day when I'm going to build it out. And she did. And then she hired me again to expand it. And so on, jump forward another couple of years. I know it gets boring. It's not done.
It's not at all boring, Ivy. Not at all.
And I got an email from her one afternoon. At this point, I was full-time in Slater Success for a bunch of years. I was releasing a weekly newsletter. And she responds to a newsletter I had written, and she goes, you have a few minutes to talk tonight after hours. Of course, when she says something, you respond. And I jumped on the phone, and she's like, this may be crazy. I've been reading what you write every week. I said, really? Somebody reads that? I thought I just wrote it.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. In fact, Tony and I were just talking about that, releasing newsletters and hoping that people are actually reading it.
Newsletters, LinkedIn posts, videos, podcasts, everything. Yes.
Like, listeners, respond to us. Let us know you're actually really listening to these episodes. Let them know, let Betsy and Tony know your feedback. What impacted you? What really makes a difference? Because as people who release content, we want to know so we can serve better.
Absolutely.
So anyway, jump forward. I get on the phone that night with her, and I was like, hey, how are you? What's up? What's going on? Chat. And she goes, listen, I have to talk to you. I'm being recruited to go back into full-time employment and let go of my agency. I said, wow, that's pretty significant. What's your why in doing it? And she goes, well, I want to buy a second home, and I know blah, 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 blah. And she takes me through, and based on the work we had done, we reference back. I said, it sounds like you're in alignment with your purpose. And she goes, so this is what I want you to do. I said, okay, what? And she goes, I want you to help me negotiate the position. I said, I'm not an attorney. I don't do legal negotiations. And I walk into every potential clients and say, I'm not an attorney, I'm not your CPA. I will raise questions and I will make sure you go to the proper professionals, or your financial planner. But all those things is part of your team and what you should have covered. So she goes, no, I know you're not an attorney, but I have done enough of your reading that I know you truly believe in stepping into your value and earning your worth. And I'm the first woman to get hired in this role. And I want to make sure I'm actually negotiating for the same salary and I end up with the same package. So I just want you in my corner to help me stand up for myself. And so it was about doing that inner work. And I said, you got it, I'm in. I want you to succeed like there's no other. And she said, great, how much are you going to charge me? Remember, she's kicked back, she is very, very diligent in her numbers. And I said, nothing. She goes, excuse me, come again. I know you, Ivy. I know you a long time. What are you going to charge me? And I said, honestly, absolutely nothing. It's a couple of conversations. I want you to get this job. And in you getting this job, I'm sure it's going to be a win-win for both of us.
Love it.
And she got the job, and I got a client called Van Cleef and Arpels. And she's gone on. She is now president of one of the other Richemont organizations. And I do coaching and consulting work and strategic leadership work for them as well, some trainings. And that's what this is about. This is a relationship that a bunch of years ago was about 18 years. I figured it out because I remember my son was at this summer in day camp, the year that bad printing job went south.
It's such a cool story because there's so many stops along the road, and it just shows like when you actually invest in a relationship, the return on that investment, I'm sure, has been huge for you.
And it absolutely. And it goes through the triple effect of all the people I've met through meeting her and the people I met through the people who introduced me to her and the people I have met diligently through Dress for Success that I do an enormous amount of volunteer work for and some non-volunteer work when they have leadership issues in some of their teams I'm brought in. And more than that, when her dad passed away a few years ago and I heard about it, I sent that handwritten note again instead of just that email. And it led to another conversation and a catch-up conversation. I'll see she posts something on Facebook and I might comment on it. And then I'll personally reach out and say, hey, through leading a global team during this pandemic, how are you holding up? How are you taking care of yourself? She's like, it's been tough. I was like, I'm just a phone call away. I'm always here for you. And that's a no charge thing because the relationship now is so beyond. The connections and what she brings me in business-wise is something else. But woman to woman, person to person, we have a relationship. And that's that golden ticket.
This is an astounding conversation, not where I thought we were going to go in this podcast. And I'm grateful for that because it's revealed so much. And I've got a number of things kind of running through my mind right now. So I'll kind of piece them together here as we go. Number one, and this is like the thing that just comes out most significantly is you said earlier, you're an introvert. I know I'm an introvert as well. And I would much rather be behind the camera, behind a microphone like this, having a one-on-one or one-on-two conversation. And I look at my business and what I've learned, very much like you've just described very eloquently, is how relationships really matter in building a business. And so if you're an introvert listening to this and you're running your own business, or you're in a sales role and you believe because you're an introvert, you cannot sell, I'm telling you, there is a method that works for us as introverts, and that is relationship building. You don't have to sell like everyone else. You don't have to pick up the phone 100 times a day. Relationship is how you sell, and it is so powerful. And the beauty of it is it goes with you as you change roles or change jobs, or as they change roles and change jobs, as you've described, Ivy. It goes with you. So I wanted to put that little bent on it because it's so meaningful and so powerful for a lot of people that I think it might open the opportunity for them to really grow.
And I will say, I think introverts make amazing salespeople because they ask questions and listen. They're not filling the gaps of talk because that's not their comfort zone. Their comfort zone is somebody else talking And so because great sales comes from great listening, because then you can actually give somebody what they're looking for. That I truly think it's the unknown quality, or the unknown fact. Let's just leave it as the unknown factor that introverts make. Whenever I look at sales teams, I want, one of my first questions if I'm coming in to work with the sales team is how many extroverts? And everybody's like, yeah, I can talk to anybody. I'm like, great. How many introverts on this team? And then I look at the gold. Because the extroverts have to be trained out of talking.
Right. And it's interesting because it ties into the really know your customer element of this and that. And I've never thought about that before. So I love that we have you here sharing this, because to really know your customer, you have to ask those questions. We know that part of it. But to make that connection, especially in a sales realm for the introverts, that they're the ones that actually get to know and build those relationships, that is so powerful. Thank you for bringing that to us.
Yeah, and I would just throw in that absolutely speaks to how we train executives before we go into an advisory board meeting. We tell them you're there to listen 80% and talk 20%, and that 20% while you're talking, you're asking deep, clarifying questions. And so that's exactly, you're so on point with that, and it translates obviously into a sales position as well.
Sometimes people say, no, I listen. I really lean my ear in. I was like, okay, but listen to it with your whole body. Your gut is going to give you information. Your heart is going to give you information. If you're truly listening, you'll hear when somebody's tone changes, and you'll ask a question about that. It's not always just what they say in words. It's how they string their words together, and the entire delivery, not just the language of it.
It's fascinating because, in the work that I do, and, Betsy was talking about the client advisory boards, and the work I do, I look at the feedback, actual words that customers are using, and there's software that helps detect emotions and things like that. But I find the most value in actually reading the feedback itself, and simple things like a resort is an example that I did work with years ago. The customers who were the guests who complained about pricing called it a hotel. The guests who realized it was a resort and spoke about it as a resort defended the pricing and said, well, it's a resort. Of course it's going to be expensive. This is all on TripAdvisor, right? And so those little nuances, like we had to go to the hotel and say, you've got 5,000 employees. It's one of the massive resorts. And all of them have to talk about this as a resort. Your marketing has to say resort. It has, because that crafts a feeling tone that people feel differently when they read that, when they see it, they're informed it's a resort, And so it's interesting, all of that comes into play as you're saying, understanding and asking those questions like, what do you think? What do you need? That all comes out.
And I always think you're right, because a resort versus a hotel is a very different place for me. A hotel is where I'm going to go and stay the night, or stay a couple of nights, and I'm going to go out and do my thing. A resort, I'm going to go get taken care of. I'm going to be booking spa, and I'm going to be, they're going to be bringing me those umbrella drinks on the beach or by the pool, whatever it's looking like. And everything's going to be at a whole different level, where a hotel, I drop my bag, I unpack, and I go do things. It's a completely different entity. And I love that.
Yeah, words matter. I mean, they really do, and the meaning they convey. One thing, speaking of that, you said to us that you didn't sell printing, that you sold a service to your clients that make them look good. So talk us through your mindset around that.
When I started as like, I was going to say every other printer, except there was not a lot of women selling printing in New York City when I started. So I didn't look like them. I didn't have a trench coat. I didn't have a briefcase, and I didn't have a cigar stench to me. Be that as it may, though, when you're told to have this portfolio of samples, and this is what you present. And I did that a couple of times, and then I'd get to somebody's office and I would ask them just instinctively, because I came from a corporate event catering background. So in that training was very much what's the vision for your event? What are you looking for? I was taught early on to ask about that. Even when I worked for my first, the job that I wasn't fired from, this exercise studio, it's like, what's your vision? What do you want to achieve? What are your goals? That was, even back in the 80s was what it was about. And so now I showed up in printing and they're like, they're like, take some samples and go walk New York. I'm like, and so I would sit down and I wouldn't take the samples out because I didn't know what to show them, but I always knew to ask questions. So I was like, so what type of work do you guys do? And they're like, well, we do this, that, or we do this, or we do that. And then I was like, oh, so what I have really isn't what you're looking for. And I realized it early on. And I finally said, I need to stop taking these damn samples because it's messing up my whole thing. Because then they want to see what I have, and then I couldn't get a job because I wouldn't have the right thing for their company. So I scrapped the samples, and early on I said, what kind of work do you do? And then I would say, what is some of the greatest experience you've had with your printers, with your printing vendors? What are some of the things that have disappointed you? They never get delivery on time. If I ask for Tuesday by noon, it comes Wednesday in the afternoon. I was like, so delivery is really important to you. I would think that. If somebody makes a commitment, you make a commitment. With my previous job in corporate events, the party couldn't happen the next day. It was the day of. I'm going to deliver the day of. That's my background. That's the only way I know to do this. And they're like, oh. I said, let's see, let's get to know each other. And I would ask the questions and then be of service. I learned really early that the marketing managers who I was selling to, who had the power to buy in the publishing industry, which was a big, big network for me, reported to certain people. And if they looked good, they would hire me. If we delivered well, the jobs looked good and everything was on time, they looked good. And my goal after I started figuring it out, and again, I was in my late 20s, early 30s at this point. It took me a little bit to figure it out, and I was like, oh, so every time we do something well, we're going to get a better chance. We're going to get more opportunity. So I started realizing, well, the better I can make my clients look to their bosses, the more I can sell. And the more then when I ask for referrals, like, hey, do you know anybody else? I know back in the day, you always said one of the frustrating things is not delivering on time. And that's something that I stand for. Anybody else that you might know that has that similar situation? So I didn't say, who else can you introduce me to? I got specific. And in that was the transformation. And I stopped trying to peddle my samples, which was irrelevant. And I created a goal of every time they look good, I had a better opportunity for the next job. It didn't matter if my prices were on point or not. They just told me where I needed to be. Because then I could say, hey, what's your budget for this? Oh, well, we're looking this way, and we're going to bid it out. I said, that's fine. Of course I expect you to bid it out. Well, what's your budget? What are you looking at? Why are you looking at that? Well, we still will have this else to do this year. And I would make notes in my notebook. Oh, they still have this and to do this year. What months might those be? Put that in my calendar. And it wasn't rocket science. It just came from asking and being curious.
Yeah, I love the point about how you just ask them what it is that they're looking to achieve, not, going into it with, what can I sell you? It's just such a different mindset.
And I have to say, I was incredibly fortunate because it came from the training that I didn't even realize I was learning. Because through corporate events, it's 100%. Some of it is corporate and some of it is personal. Because what happens is you do a corporate job and then they hire you for their personal stuff. It's a beautiful trickle down effect. In corporate, they would show up and say, well, we have this budget. We're da-da-da-da. It's like, great. They're like, okay, what can you give us for the budget? What can we make happen? And you'd make it happen. And as long as you made it happen with ease and beauty, and it was on budget, they were thrilled. And you got hired again. And then some partner of some organization or something was at that event, and that would be a next referral. and that might be a personal referral, but if somebody's hiring you to do something personally, budget becomes on par with their vision. And they're only going to hire you if you're connecting on their vision.
Yeah, and I think the point you make about making it pretty much painless for them, like removing that friction is such a big part of knowing your customers. So knowing what their friction points are and what drives one person crazy may not be a problem at all for someone else. So it's really getting to know that customer and know what their friction is, what their pain points are personally, as well as with the company, and then trying to be that buffer.
It's, what I'll refer to as listening with your whole body, not just your ear. Listen with your eyes. Look around, when you're sitting in a meeting with somebody, see how they surround themselves in their office. What are their hobbies? Get to know that person. I knew that story I told you about that 18-plus-year-old client is a huge baker. That's her thing. She loves to bake. She loves to invest in real estate. So when this whole pandemic started, my question was, hey, where are you sheltering? Because I know she has several properties. Come from a place of caring, thinking of her.
I think that's such an important aspect. And Betsy and I talk about this a lot, in the really knowing your customer. It starts maybe with knowing what they need, what they want, what their vision is in their business. But then it goes so much deeper into that relationship, knowing who they are as individuals, whether it's B2B or B2C. I think the same thing is true. And in fact, we had a conversation earlier today where, as I was talking, I told Betsy, I said, in this pandemic, no smart person is going to pick up the phone and call their clients or customers and say, okay, what's next on the business agenda? They're going to first say, how are you doing? What's going on with you? Is your family okay? Right? They're going to ask those empathetic questions and move that along first and deepen the relationship before they get to the business, because that's the only way the business is going to continue to grow.
Exactly. And when you actually come from that place of caring, and I've been on the phone with many, many people, wasn't your son supposed to be getting married this spring? How has that evolved? What are they looking for? Oh, well, we're going to do this versus this. And, we're all dry. What is it looking like? Oh, my kid got married on Zoom. Oh, yeah, I never pictured homeschooling. The teachers have been great. Oh, the teachers have been terrible. It's all that information is coming. And in that information is what I refer to as that golden nugget, because that's where a true relationship is. And when you know somebody, that's when they talk in sales, that know, like, and trust. That's where trust is.
Ivy, I'm going to get down in the weeds here for a second. With the way you approach these relationships, how do you personally keep track of this? Do you use a CRM? Do you have a notebook? How do you do what you do so well?
Oh, well, let's not say I do it well. I mess up plenty. And I'm committed to it. And I think that there's the thing. I was on a webinar the other day, and I was teaching on, what was that? I did two, when you do two webinars back to back, 2 days in a row and two different topics?
Yes, we do.
Relationships. Exactly. And the other was on effective virtual teams in 2020. And one of my end slides was a picture of CRM systems, a good old-fashioned Rolodex that you turned with all the layers, and an index card box, and a calendar. And I am that perfect hybrid of going from the old-fashioned Rolodex and index card box to the newfangled CRM system to calendar. So I do both, and I'm going to share what I'm going to do, but I want every listener to know I mess up plenty. And it doesn't stop me from reaching back out. So I do use a CRM system. I make all my notes in the CRM system. When we were first introduced and we had that very first, we met through a mutual friend and a colleague, I made notes in my CRM system. But where I fail is I never put my follow-up in my CRM system. I never put that date on the calendar. That's where I go back to my old school. Even if my calendar is electronic, I put that in my calendar. I was like, I should be talking to Betsy and Tony again here. Oh, and I should, Betsy has that boat. I should touch base with her in July and see how their summer on the boat is. That's where I calendar. Smart, really, really efficient people stay strictly with a great CRM and will put every piece in there and put their prompts in there. When I found I did that and it told me what to do that day, I never actually listened to it. So the old school training of being very calendar centric kicks in for me. So that's the way it is.
Well, I think it's really not a right or wrong, but more what works best for each person. I have some things that I do paper notes. I've tried OneNote, I've tried Evernote, I've tried all of these things. And when I use them, I'm like, oh, I get it. This is really good. But I'm not compelled to use them as much as just writing down in a notebook. So I think it's really about what works best for just the way your style is.
Absolutely. And taking the time to truly know yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it reminds me, and I think I've mentioned this before on our show, but I have this dentist office that I've gone to for 30 years, and I go twice a year for an hour. And yet every time I go back, they're like, oh, hey, how's such and such? And, I don't see them. They must be behind me taking notes, but they always are on top of whatever it is that's been going on in my life. And it's just remarkable to me. And it's so impressive. Thus, I'm a 30-year client of this dental practice. So I think it's so important to do that. And I get inspired by hearing how committed you are to it, because I want to be that committed. I try very hard, and I do take really good notes, but like you, the follow-up sometimes falls through. But I'm getting there, and I'm figuring out my own system. So.
And I think that is key. I think it's not about trying to be perfect about it. It's just about being committed to it. And as I will, completely in front of everybody say, I mess up plenty. I keep a notebook. Oh, I've been meaning to text that person, or I've been meaning to email that person, or call that person, or whatever. And all day these ideas are coming down, and I just jot it into my notebook. And then at the end of the day, I can actually then plan things out. And then if 70 to 80% happen and 20 to 30% fall off, but those people I do care about, so they're going to come back to me. Then I do it then.
It's really funny. I just got an email this afternoon from someone that it was just a stay in touch email. And he was like, gosh, I can't believe how fast the last 4 weeks have flown. And last time I talked to you, you were heading down to the lake. How was your trip? So he clearly has a tickler and a system and took some notes. And I thought, that is so impressive, and it's somebody that I could ultimately end up hiring to help with my business. And it just elevates your idea of who this person is, that they care enough, they're organized enough, they are action oriented enough to actually follow through with that. So I think that's a really key point.
I had one more question that just came up as you were talking. You said you have to know yourself, and I'm curious what's your take on the more you know yourself, the better you're going to be able to know your customer. How does that play out for you? What do you think about that?
I think as leaders, we have to know our strengths and weaknesses, because as leaders, we have the ability to, when we own what we're good at, or willing to see what we're good at, because sometimes we don't, and willing to see what we're not good at, and as opposed to just stuff that into a drawer, bring in support around it. And they say the greatest leaders build themselves teams that support every weakness they have. When you show up that way, then you can show up with a great heart to know your customer, and to know if I'm not really organized in a certain fashion, I know my team has my back, and we could then really, really be of service to people. Because none of us are great at 100% of anything. We all stink at something. We're not supposed to be good at everything. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. I come from a line of women, And there's an organizational track that runs through this women's line in my family. From my mom in her day, in her day, in her sweet spot, both my sister and I, my daughter, my niece. Now, I do strategic planning, growth, development for companies and organizations. So I think I'm pretty organized. My sister and my daughter talk in front of my face. It's like, yeah, well, Ivy will never really get that. She can't stay organized that way. And they, I can't, and, I truly think my daughter cuddles with a spreadsheet.
I know those people.
And that, know what you're good at and know where you're not, and have that as backup. I have an uncanny memory with some things, and I have a lousy memory with others. My mother, who is in her high 80s, might not know a lot of things or remember a lot of things anymore. She knows her numbers. We always said, we'll know she has a memory issue when she doesn't know her numbers.
Ivy, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you if they want to reach out or to follow you?
Please feel free to join me at slatersuccess.com. On Slater Success, you're going to find a ton of resources. There is a video of 7 Traits of Great Leaders. My podcast that's called Her Success Story, with interviews with smart, gutsy women and a few wonderful men, as well as my book, From the Bar to the Boardroom, Choreographing Business Success Through Authentic Relationships, just what we were talking about today.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. We have truly enjoyed this conversation, and I know there's just tons of knowledge that our listeners gain from the conversation with you. So thanks again, and we wish you continued health and wellness, and enjoy the rest of your day, Ivy.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a joy to be here with both of you.
I don't know how we follow that up. That was just an amazing conversation. I think some of the things that I really pull out of that conversation with Ivy is that really knowing your customer means asking the questions. And I think going in without the agenda, without saying I'm here to sell something, but just truly opening up from the heart and asking what is it they need, what is it they do, wanting to learn is such a key component of this. And I know she didn't use that word learn, but I think that that's what underlies all of this. She did use the word curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really got from that I hope I will start implementing, because I really, really grabbed onto this, was about not just listening with your ears, but listening with your eyes and your heart and your gut. And I just thought that was such a good, tangible, visual, mental image that you can use when you're sitting down and talking to your customers. Like, it's not enough just, and that's like you and I have talked about with surveys on paper or electronic surveys versus actually getting in front of them and having a conversation and reading body language and observing interactions and that kind of thing. And that's one thing I love to do at the advisory board meetings, is just kind of step back and observe how our client is interacting with their customers and try to get the vibe of what's going on in the room. So I just thought that was just a really brilliant thing she said about listening with your whole body.
Yeah, and I find the same thing to be true when I'm doing the analysis on the customer experience and reading the feedback, reading the reviews, the survey comments. I very much do that from a full body experience. And it's something that's hard to teach people to do. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's just hard to teach people to do. You've got to have that willingness to do it. In that openness to be vulnerable, if you will, because it does have an effect on you when you feel someone else's emotions when you're reading that. Another element that really stands out to me is that if you really want to know your customer, you've got to really know yourself. And while we haven't talked about it extensively in this podcast so far, it's an element of personal development is key to leadership success. And so if you're the C-level executive listening to this or a business owner listening to this, you're more than likely to have gone through some type of personal development work. They may have called it coaching or something else, but that's an area where you may look and say, how do I go deeper into that? How do I really understand myself? Who can I get as a mentor or a coach to help me through this? Because it will accelerate your results in so many ways, and it will have an impact on your business as well. I know as a small business owner, and Betsy, I'm sure you've seen this as well, your business can only grow to the extent of the weaknesses that you rely upon. And it's like, it doesn't matter how good my strengths are. If I have a weakness that I am the one delivering the value in that area, that's the best I can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny thinking about knowing yourself, about what I've observed with various clients on those leaders that are open to the feedback from the customers versus those that immediately feel defensive. Fortunately, 99.9% of the people I work with, they wouldn't hire us if they didn't have some ability to be open-minded toward the feedback. But I have had that occasional leader who, the minute the customer would start talking, you could just feel their body tense up, and they were already thinking about their response. Instead of listening to understand, they're thinking, how can I respond? And so, that personal development side and knowing yourself well enough to know, okay, yeah, sometimes this feedback's not easy to hear, but it's going to help us grow as individuals and grow as a company. So yeah, great points. She's obviously got a lot of good mojo with her clients and has such great skills as far as just being a good human and really caring about her customers. So that's it for today's episode with our guest, Ivy Slater. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.